It turned out that before I came to SRI, I was originally over at Stanford, and while there, university, and while there, I co-authored a textbook with my thesis advisors. It was a graduate level textbook on fundamentals of quantum electronics and lasers and that kind of thing, published in English, French, Russian, and Chinese, by the way. And nothing like writing a textbook to realize what you don't know. And one of the issues that bugged me at the time, and actually bugged many physicists at the time, was, well, what about consciousness? What about life? Is it still just atoms and molecules all the way down? Or are there some additional fields that are not yet incorporated into physics? And this is really a big deal at the time. Many of us as theoretical physicists were trying to figure out the answer to that question. And so as part of my searches, somebody knew I was interested in trying to figure this out, gave me this book called Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, in which they were talking about all kinds of wild kinds of fields. And they gave it to me in the hopes I might find something in there that could answer this question. Interestingly enough, one of the things that caught my attention in this book was actually research by an American researcher by the name of Cleve Backster. He's a polygraph expert. He taught polygraph to CIA, FBI, law enforcement people. And one day on a lark, he happened to connect a plant up to a polygraph, just for a lark. And when he did, he saw signals coming out of it that actually were very similar to the kind of signals he sees coming out of people. And so he got the idea, I wonder if plants have some level of sentience, like some low-level consciousness. So just as he would do with a person, that is, startle them or threaten them to see if he get a response, he did the same thing. He decided to get a match and he was going to set a leaf on fire, and he got a response. And so that really set him on the path to try and determine if plants are sentient. And even more interesting, he did several experiments where he'd take a plant here and have another plant over someplace else, and he'd threaten one plant, and the other plant would show a response, as if there was some kind of telepathic communication between the plants. So anyway, I read that and I thought, that sounds really interesting. There must be a physics experiment in here somewhere. So I thought of doing one. I was going to take an algae culture, grow it up in the lab, separate it into two halves, place one of the halves at a remote laser link site, and keep one half where I was. I would then zap the local culture with laser and see if the remote one responded. Was there a response? And if there was a response, could I measure the speed of propagation by seeing how long it took for the response to get there? So for me, this was a physics experiment. It had nothing to do with telepathy or ESP or anything like that. So anyway, I sent this off to Cleve Backster and said, well, what do you think of this experiment using algae instead of a plant? Well, this is one of those things where your life takes a massive turn off in some direction by pure coincidence. It turns out there was a cocktail party in New York City. At that cocktail party, Ingo Swann on the left ran into Cleve Backster on the right. And since you're interested in remote viewing, you probably all know that Ingo Swann is a well-known psychic, also quite a well-known artist. And anyway, while he was at Baxter's lab, he saw my proposal on the desk and read it and wrote me a letter. And he said, well, if you're interested in the borderline between animate and inanimate physics, why work with algae? They can't tell you what's happening. You should work with someone like me. Ordinarily, because I was still a hardcore physicist at the time, I would have thrown that into the garbage, except attached to the letter was a big report from City College in New York where experiments had been done with him in which, on command, he could raise and lower the temperature of a sensitive temperature measuring device in a thermos model on the other side of the lab. Well, I thought that was pretty interesting. So I said, okay, why don't you come on out to SRI? We'll try some experiments. I'd like to see what you can do. That thermistor experiment in the thermos bottle, that's pretty interesting. So this is a picture of us about the time he showed up. And of course, as he was on the way, on the plane, on the way, I talked to my physics colleagues about having this, quote, psychic who could apparently do psychokinesis coming out. And of course, all my skeptical colleagues said, oh my God, you know, these guys are all frauds and charlatans. You better really have something good. Well, as it turns out, I did have something good. I had a shielded magnetometer. It measures sensitive magnetic fields that are down inside this device. The device has mu metal magnetic shielding. It has electrical shielding. It's acoustically isolated from vibrations from the environment. Half buried in the basement of a physics building. It even had superconducting shielding that nothing is supposed to get through. And so I took him there and said, I want to show you this device. It's sort of like your thermos bottle experiment on steroids. But anyway, there's a sensitive thing down inside that measures temperature, measures magnetic fields very sensitively, but it's completely shielded from the outside. I'd like to know if you could affect it. Ordinarily, when the device is sitting there, the output of the device is just a slowly moving sine wave like this. It takes maybe 20, 30 seconds to go through a cycle. And he says, well, let me look inside. And I said, no, this thing's all sealed up. It's at liquid helium temperature. And he said, no, I don't mean that way. And what he meant, which we would now call remote viewing, he, quote, looked inside and started drawing out what he saw and describing what it looked like, which, by the way, was quite accurate and never been published before. So that was impressive. And while he did it, this happened. The thing went kind of berserk. Poor graduate student whose life depended on this thing not being affectable from the outside panicked and said, oh, something's wrong. There's some kind of glitch. Maybe there are bubbles in the liquid helium line. Let me check it out. So he did his checking out routine, and everything seemed to be. He said, well, I'm sure that, you know, you can never make that happen again. That was just some kind of coincidence. So, in fact, Ingo did make it happen again. So he told us to go get a snack. He had to find out what was wrong with his instrument. So we took off for a half hour or so, came back, and said, well, I'm sure that stuff this earlier was just some kind of coincidence. And he did it again. By the way, when I was there, I was thinking in advance that, you know, if I come out and say this guy did something weird, I better have some good backup. And one of the signatories on this graph here is Martin Lee from the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, who built the big positron storage ring. So he's a very well-known scientist. So we left the lab, and poor grad student took data for some more hours, and there was never any other effect. So that was pretty interesting. I wrote this up and circulated around to my physics colleagues, and suddenly the CIA descends on my doorstep. They said, oh, have we been looking for you?